Hello dear viewer. Today a bit of a serious video because I want to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I think it is crucial to understand why it is so important. I'm talking about film preservation, which is something that is relevant to all of us who collect films on physical media. Now, I'm always thinking about film preservation, but something that has really spurred it on for me in the last week is watching two recent releases that have been talked about a lot on the internet. Of course, I'm talking about the James Cameron 4Ks, True Lies and Aliens. Now, this video is not a review of these two 4K discs. You can find plenty of reviews both on YouTube and websites and forums of these discs. Some very positive reviews, some very negative reviews of these discs. What I will say is that I am in that negative camp. I did not like what has been done to these films for this recent restoration and for these discs. To my eyes, James Cameron has gone back and revised the look of these films to make them look as digital as possible, to make them look modern, much like his Avatar films, which do look very clean, very digital. Cameron clearly has issues with how these films looked originally, how they were made on film. He's one of those people that I think does not like the medium of film. And both of these restorations employ plenty of digital effects like digital noise reduction, edge enhancement, artificial intelligence to sharpen the image as well. And it's plain to see that neither of these are new 4K scans from the original camera negative. These are both dated transfers that have been upscaled and used all of those effects that I just spoke about. So what does all this have to do with film preservation, and why is it such an issue that could affect film watching and film collecting and film loving as a whole? Well, let's just talk about what film preservation actually is and what it means if you're not familiar with the concept. Films, historically, in the 20th century, before digital, they were shot on film, which was a physical medium. It was analog, it would capture the image, but it was also very sensitive and delicate. It could very easily be destroyed or scratched and dirtied. So people that loved film actually caught on and thought that, hey, we should actually look after this stuff for the future because otherwise it might be lost forever. And unfortunately, this was already way too late, because if you go back to the 1910s and the 1920s and 30s, so many films that came out that were released have been lost forever. And today, people still make it their mission to try and find lost reels and original negatives that could be stashed away somewhere, just for the hopes of discovering films that have been lost. So you might think, oh, who cares? I don't watch black and white films. I don't watch films from the 30s, etc. Why should I care? I only watch new films. Well, even in the realm of digital, the films have to be kept somewhere. They can be kept on a file, and that file could risk being lost, especially in the age of streaming, when we have films that are produced by streaming companies and are then stripped off the streaming services, seemingly at random sometimes. Then it is a real issue that we could lose films and lose access to films for the foreseeable future. But it's not just about the film existing or not existing anymore. It's also the form in which it does exist. Because a film can exist in different versions. It can be manipulated, altered, whether that's authentically or maliciously. And that is what brings me on to James Cameron and his recent restorations of his filmography. He has gone back and restored these films, but he has utilised many effects that have changed the way these films look. Whether you like how the new 4K discs of True Lies and Aliens and The Abyss, which I haven't seen that disc because it didn't get a release over here, whether you like how those discs look, you can't deny that they look different to how they have looked in the past. Now, there is subjectivity here, because it is subjective as to whether you think that True Lies on 4K looks good. And I'm not here to tell you that you're an idiot if you think it looks good just because I think it looks bad. But it isn't subjective to talk about this in regards to film preservation and say that this altered version, and the same with Aliens, is not preserving how the film originally was made and screened, and is not presenting it in the best, most authentic way possible. Because now we live in a reality where these versions of these films are most likely the versions that will live on far into the future, and we can't do anything about that. Previous versions will continue to exist on those physical discs and tapes, etc., but eventually they will degrade and those versions will be lost. So in 20 or 30 years' time, when someone sits down to watch True Lies, they are more than likely going to be seeing this current restoration, because it's unlikely that any further work will be done on this in the future. I mean, it might be, but I don't know what kind of stipulations are in contracts regarding these films now. Like, if a filmmaker passes away, what happens to that film? Maybe there might be things that say it can't be touched anymore because the original artist is no longer with us. And this raises important questions as to who does the art belong to? Now, if there is a creator like James Cameron, many people would say that these films are his films, and they would say that he can do whatever he wants to these films. Other people would say that as an artist, as soon as you put your art out into the world for public consumption, it ceases to be yours. Now, that is a huge topic which I couldn't possibly arrive at any sort of answer here. But if we talk about these James Cameron movies with that sort of viewpoint, I would much prefer, if James Cameron wants to change the looks of his films to make them more digital, make them more modern, make them more clean and less grainy, etc., I would much prefer if he had his own version, but then we also had another version which was newly restored that kept the authentic look of how the film has looked in the past. And this is something where you could get other independent people involved who could judge how authentic a presentation is, judging off all previous materials. Then we would at least have multiple versions that we could choose from, and they would both exist into the future. A bit like having a director's cut of a film and a theatrical cut. If both versions exist, you have the choice, and it doesn't matter if the original creator has gone and made changes, because you always have the choice to watch the original. But again, it's a tricky conversation to have when talking about film preservation and 4K restorations, because the new technology of HDR, high dynamic range, which is essentially metadata included in the file of a film that affects how the film looks. Some people say this is inauthentic because HDR didn't exist on original film screenings, and often HDR is used to enhance what is already there in the image. So maybe there is a bit of dissonance there if I believe that HDR looks good, but that films shouldn't be altered like James Cameron has altered his films. But, I mean, those are apples and oranges in my mind. HDR, when it is utilised properly, is at least trying to get a film back to an authentic starting point. It's trying to get the film back to a position where it looked like it did, if that makes sense. Like I said, it is a huge topic, much more than I can cover in a small video like this, and it's the kind of thing which, warrants discussion between many people. So in that regard, I'd love to hear your thoughts personally on these James Cameron discs, also whether directors and filmmakers should be allowed to change how their films looked. George Lucas was a prime example of this when he started making changes to the actual content of the films, not just the look, but he would actually go in and add scenes and add CGI, etc. I'll conclude by just discussing why I think it is so important and why it is much bigger than these James Cameron films. Because this does set a precedent to other filmmakers if they want to go and change their films. And this is something that other people have been talking about recently, and I think the more people that talk about it, the better it is. Because we are fast arriving at a point where the quality in terms of picture and audio is so good in the 4K generation that in the future there might not be any need to go back and restore these films again or do further versions. So in that sense, these films are being locked in for the future in their current versions, which is a real shame if they are not presented in a very authentic way. And I must stress again that this isn't about whether you or I think a 4K disc looks good or bad. This is something much bigger. This is something about the future of film itself and preserving these films for the future, for future generations. And you know what? I would love to hear what James Cameron thinks of this whole discussion around these releases, because I'm not even sure if he's aware of what's been said on the internet, but it interests me, because does he not think about the preservation of film and how important that can be? Because in a sense, what he is doing is he is not just scrubbing grain, he's scrubbing history. He is removing how these films did look in the past from general access, so we can no longer go back and look at how these films did look when they were originally released. So those are just some quick thoughts that have just come off the top of my head. I haven't planned this, I didn't write anything down for this video, so hopefully it has come out somewhat coherent. I do apologise if it hasn't, but I would love to know what you think about this whole topic. So if you'd like, leave me a comment down below and I'll get back to you. If you would like to stick around on the channel and get some recommendations from me for films to watch, then just click the video that's presented on screen right now. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.